Hello, greetings everyone. Welcome back. I'm doing this to help reduce the problems associated with bandwidth, as well as the viewing difficulty that many of you are having during this time of pandemic. So, my suggestion here is would be for you to go through the various slides, the quiz, and participate in the activities that are placed on eLab on a weekly basis, and this will help you do well in your exam. So, all right, today I'll be doing an overview of some of the topics we have already covered. Do go online and answer some of the questions on eLib, and that will help you keep up. So, three things that we're going to be looking at. Number one is what is discourse analysis? What is discourse analysis used for? And how is discourse analysis different from other methods? So let's start. What is discourse analysis? You've heard it many, many times, but it's a question we have to start thinking about. Now, this is a difficult question, but what I want you to realize is this is has something to do with ethnographic research. Schifrin has said something about discourse analysis, many things, but one that you need to remember is discourse analysis, anything beyond the sentence, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics that you can use to analyze linguistics. It's language in context. People are doing things with language used in the coffee shop. We sit down and we analyze. I think Dr. Thing has done a number of research on this in Cebu rice cake shops and all that. So, something for you to read about. Nowadays, we have a broader range. This includes non linguistic social practices such as attire, gesture, Twitter, Instagram. Sometimes these are not really linguistic, but we need to include them as you move on with time. Now, there's also such a thing called Foucault's sense of discourse, and this is a third level. And you'll find that Foucault's is not just the use of a language of an individual communication, but larger systems of thought within a particular historical location that makes certain things thinkable and sayable. So, if people are getting excited about something, it's probably because it shows there is a social context. It shows how language is being used in real life situation. All right, we'll go to the next question. But I want you to think of a situation where people suddenly become very excited because somebody said something. Can you go online and find one and share it with the class now? All right, good luck. Right. Now let's look at it. If you really look at it, discourse analysis is a research method for studying written or spoken language in relation to its social context. It aims to understand how language is used in real life situations. So, when you do discourse analysis, you might focus on the purpose and effect of different types of language, cultural rules and conventions in communication, and how values, beliefs, and assumptions are communicated. It also looks at how language use relates to its social, political, and historical context. So, what you need to know now is discourse analysis is a common qualitative research method in many humanities, social science disciplines, including linguistics, sociology, anthropology, psychology, and cultural studies. So, what is discourse analysis used for? That's the next question you need to know. Discourse analysis is used to examine how language functions and how meaning is created in different social contexts. It can be applied to written or oral language as well as to non-verbal aspects of language, such as tone, gesture, visuals. Materials that are suitable for discourse analysis will include books, newspapers, and periodicals. Marketing material, brochures, advertisements, business and government documents, websites, forums, interviews, conversations are all part of discourse analysis. So, by analyzing this kind of discourse, the researcher will be able to gain an understanding of the social groups and how they communicate. So, my next question is how would this DA be different from other methods? Now, what you need to know is unlike linguistic approaches that focus only on the rules of language, discourse analysis emphasizes the contextual meaning of language. It will focus on the social aspects of communication and the way people use language to achieve specific effects such as introduction, building a relationship, evoking emotions, and managing conflict. So rather than focus on smaller units of language, such as sound, words, discourse analysis, we also look at sentence and beyond, such as part of a conversation or the entire conversation. Now let's go to the next slide. Right, let's move on. So, if you really look at it, analysis, rather than focusing on smaller units of language such as sound, words, phrases, discourse, it also looks at sentences and beyond, such as parts of the conversation. And these selected sources are analyzed at multiple levels. So, how do we do a discourse analysis? A G actually breaks up discourse analysis into two basic approaches. One is called descriptive, where it's largely linguistics, and critical, which is applied and political. If you notice, Hodges actually in 2008 looked at orientation, formal linguistic analysis. So it's meant there are many frameworks. It's on how and which particular scholar that you're looking at. So, what do we analyze? I'll look at the scholars later, but let's look at what do we analyze? What's your source of data? And for this, you will need to look at samples of written or oral language as well as text. And then you start analyzing. And this means a micro-analysis of linguistic, grammar, and semantic use and meaning of the text. So there's such a thing called empirical discourse. Here, you have sample of the oral language and text and data on the uses of text in social setting, a certain setting. This is how it is. Like for instance, people want to give a speech. They have an introduction. They have a prayer session. Then they move on to introducing everyone else's. I don't know. It depends on the situation that you're working on. But what is important is you do what you call as a micro analysis and macro analysis of the way in which language and the text is being constructed according to that social practice. Next, we are going to be looking at Foucauldian analysis. Now, Foucauldian analysis, you don't have to know Foucault here, but it actually looks at samples of written or oral language and data at an institutional setting, individuals who produce them. And normally you look at political leaders or some leaders who are actually creating waves. That's one way of looking at it. I'll introduce you to a particular text in a short while, but I want you to understand that there are basically three approaches to understanding discourse analysis. All right, so here is a framework for you to take a look at. These are the distinct properties that you will need to look at when you're doing discourse analysis. So, how can we best work on it? You have a framework, and we're going to be looking at language beyond the sentence. So, linguists normally will be interested in language properties. They look for formal properties based on what you've learned in linguistics. Now, if you are into social linguistic or different kinds of perspectives, this is more normally applied linguists, or you will start looking at conversational analysis. This will be empirical discourse analysis, where you start looking at frequencies. And then, of course, you will also have language in use, like, for instance, how doctors talk to patients when on the ground. This is getting very popular, so it'll be good if you do look at medical discourse. A lot of people are interested in healthcare after the pandemic, so we'll look at that. Then, of course, you have larger social practices. This is called critical discourse analysis. So you can do a descriptive, you can do an applied version, or you can do a critical discourse where you criticize or see what is happening at that stage. Now, linguists and applied linguists and people from social sciences are interested in this kind of discourse. A lot of researchers are interested in issues such as racism or in fear mongering, fake news. So, how at a particular time, at a particular place, people have different ways of looking at a particular topic, perspectives. What is thinkable and what is sayable. For instance, masculinity, if you notice. Once upon a time, heroes were like Hang Tuah, where they moved around and they listened to the king and all that. But now you find masculinity is an entirely different concept. What is this kind of analysis? And how did we move to this? And how can you find evidence of this conversation elsewhere? This is how you start looking at it. I think your assignment 3 actually looked at it. So I hope this actually clears up some of the confusion that we have had about in the discourse analysis class. There are basically three ways of looking at it: writing up discourse analysis, and these are typical ways of looking at it. So I'm going to explain to you about the construct, or how should I say, the structure of a discourse analysis text in the next section. Just answer the quiz. Right. Now we are coming up to the topic on writing up a paper on discourse analysis. Now, honestly, there's no right way about doing it actually. Typically, there are different parts of a discourse analysis article. And what's important is first you have to give it considerable attention to the title. Title often signals a discourse analysis. Then, of course, there's the abstract. Now, the abstract actually will show you what it is. It's a good idea to see the keywords and look at the structure. How are they going to work on it? Then you have the introductory paragraph, and you'll need to know about what scholars need to know in the field. So, give a brief introduction about so and so, or somebody who has worked about this paper and what they say, and then try to make a connection. Either you look at somebody's article and look for these points, or when you're starting to write, you have to consider this. So you need to know what scholars need to know in the field, hint at the general corpus or genre that you would be investigating. You have to mention, is it interview, is it Twitter corpus, whichever you have in mind. All right. So you have something like this article will, and that's what you need to be saying. Even within the first introductory paragraph, you have to mention what you would be attacking, or you will be actually looking, dissecting. So after the introduction, give some background information on the problem, the genre, the medium, the linguistic features that you'll be looking. Written for the general audience about Malaysia. Let's say you're writing about Malaysian classroom, then think, what would international people need to know about Malaysian classroom? What do you think they will need to know about the location where it's done and how it will differ from others? Now, also background in the linguistic features you want to use, like adjacency, pairs. Then you have to see how they have initiation and response. Make sure you know what this grammatical term is. Then you will have to want to look at the method section. You must have a method section, and that is important. So you start looking at that section and cite previous discourse analysis theories and methodologies. And if you're using Halliday or G's particular method, explain how it's normally done. Then specify the corpus you're working with and how you plan to collect it. Okay? Speak of validity, quality, trustworthiness. Then from this section, you will start to have to move to your finding section. Right. Now we have come to the finding section, which is probably the final part of it. So if you are tying up your assignment 3, it'll be good to make sure that you have an idea of where you are headed. So what you need to do is, if you're using the finding section, you've come to that section, you have to make sure that it's well organized. You must have headings that have relevance to what you've been discussing. And if you're using particular aspects, then organize your headings appropriately. It is important that you explicate specific information from your data so that it actually presents in your finding section. You need to have actual sections, take excerpts from what you've analyzed, explain codes, point out specific parts of the codes as evidence. Now, in the finding section, some of us will use tables and figures if needed. If you have lots of large data, then you can actually present them as tables. You need to have actual section, that's important. Explain codes, point out specific parts of the codes, and then try to relate with your objective. Now, in the finding section also, you have to use tables and figures, and then you need to have a discussion to explain the implication of knowing what we gain from the article or from whatever research that you've conducted. Then you have to have an explanation on implication for policy matters, for policymakers, researchers who are probably interested in a similar field. Then there's also other things like references, which you must also put in. You must also find speakers or scholars who have agreed with something similar to your research. And if you're using transcription, you can put them in a section like in the appendix. Transcription actually can be in the method section, finding section, and appendices. Now, some part of the transcription might be very important, and therefore they should be in the method as well as findings. Only supplementary items should illuminate in the main content, otherwise put it elsewhere. So these are typically the parts of a discourse analysis. We will look at a particular paper next week. So in the meantime, please go over to the slides, complete, participate in the forum discussion. And I look forward to meeting you next week. Please forward any questions that you have in case you want me to answer them. I will, or else we can have a Zoom session and we can discuss further on these topics. Thank you.